Here in New York, it's pretty hard to take a walk without coming across one of the many smoke shops that have been springing up everywhere, legally selling cannabis products. I mean, things like vape oil, joints, gummies. It really does feel here in New York that it's mainstream, that it's normal. But as the latest UN World Drug Report has shown, the decriminalization of cannabis hasn't been without consequences, particularly in terms of health. So on today's show, we are going to be finding out more from one of the authors of that report, and we'll also be looking at the possible connections between the end of the Colombian Civil War and a significant rise in cocaine use. Welcome to UN Weekly. It's Connor Lennon in the upgraded radio studio at UN headquarters in New York. If you're watching the show on YouTube, you will see the lovely new surroundings. And you'll also see that I'm joined by two European news heavyweights. I think that's a fair description. I don't know why you're laughing. It's true. Jérôme Bernard we have here, the head of the UN News French unit. And we have Benno Schwinghammer, the UN correspondent for Deutsche Presse-Agentur. I hope my pronunciation was okay with that.
Impressed, deeply impressed.
Agentur is a fun word to say. And that's the German press agency. Well, first of all, explain a bit more about what DPA is and what it does.
So it's quite straightforward, I would say. DPA, you can see it when you are news savvy, you know Associated Press or Reuters. We are basically the biggest German news agency, but we have customers all around the world. We publish mostly in German, but like we have an English wire, we have an Arabic wire as well, and we publish straight news, unbiased, factual based. And I'm here in New York.
And you're here in New York, right? So basically doing what Yoshito, who was on the show last week, is doing in India, the press shot of India, just unbiased, verifiable, accurate information in German, as you say, in some other languages. And you're the UN correspondent.
Yes, that's correct. So unsurprisingly, I do have a focus on German-related news here out of UN headquarters, but that doesn't mean that it is limited to that, right? I think with most of my colleagues, I have in common that the crises and the conflicts and the wars in Gaza and Ukraine eat all or most of my time. But when the German foreign minister is here, for example, I'm very busy as well.
Sure. And apart from when the big dignitaries come in and the crises that everyone's talking about, are there any particular stories that you think people in German-speaking countries are perhaps more interested in than other countries might be interested in?
I think the United Nations is a very, very good information source for places in the world which are not very accessible for my DPA colleagues around the globe. For example, the best example I can think of is North Korea. We have great information due to a panel of experts reports here in the United Nations about what happens in North Korea, which is, for many other people around the world, a black box. So when I report about something that I read from the UN about North Korea, this is something that's really helpful for my audience.
Right, so North Korea stories are big with the German-speaking audience.
They're a big winner, yeah. That people like to read them.
And Jérôme, as I said, you're the head of the French unit. I luckily enough to be able to read French, so I do follow your pages. And what I noticed is, and I find this generally, is that it's a reminder of this huge francophone world that perhaps English speakers tend not to know so much about. And I'm thinking particularly of African francophone countries. And do you focus on certain countries in a way that other languages don't? I'm thinking Burkina Faso, the West African French-speaking countries in particular.
Yes, the countries you mentioned, Western Africa, Sahel. I mean, it's like countries where French is spoken by the population. So we have an audience there. I mean, in Central Africa, you have Democratic Republic of the Congo. But you have other countries, I mean, not only in Africa, but where French is spoken by a lot of people. And you have Canada, you have Switzerland, you have Belgium, but you have Haiti, So there are, and especially with covering the international news with the UN angle, Haiti is important for us. And especially right now, there is a deep crisis in Haiti. And there is a very strong interest in our audience about what's happening in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating what's happening and really quite tragic. And we haven't talked about it much on UN Weekly, but we will come to it. And of course, on your pages, well, in fact, all of the language pages, Haiti is really coming through as a really important crisis. Apart from Haiti, are there any other big stories from the Francophone world that are of particular interest to French-speaking readers?
I mean, there are major peacekeeping missions, in Africa. There is like the MONUSCO mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's deployed in the eastern part of the Congo, just so a small part. But that's where the issues are, security issues are. And there is another one in Central African Republic, and there was one in Mali, but it left. So that there is an interest in what peacekeepers were doing and what they are doing right now in Central African Republic and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Well, in last week's show, we focused on the ways the UN supports democracy and democratic governance, and we touched on the ways that misinformation can be really harmful and dangerous, particularly during elections. Well, this week, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres released recommendations for what we're calling information integrity. It's basically dealing with the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online, and ensuring we can really trust the information we read, see, and hear. At a press conference to launch the document, Mr. Guterres called on everyone involved in putting information online to do their bit.
First, to the big tech companies, take responsibility. Acknowledge the damage your products are inflicting on people and communities, and you have the power to mitigate harm to people and societies around the world. You have the power to change business models that profit from disinformation and hate. Second, to advertisers and the PR industry. Stop monetizing harmful content. Strengthen information integrity, protect your brand, boost your bottom line. The climate crisis is a cause of particular concern. Coordinated disinformation campaigns are seeking to undermine climate action. Creatives, don't use your talents to greenwash. PR agencies, look for clients who aren't misleading people and destroying our planet. Third, my message to media outlets is raise and reinforce editorial standards. Do your part to safeguard our future by providing quality journalism based on facts and reality. Find advertisers who are part of the solution, not the problem.
That was the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres with strong words for tech companies, PR and media organisations and governments, urging them all to play their part in cracking down on mis and disinformation. The document holds out the promise of a world in which the integrity of the information we receive is upheld and, in the words of the document, a digital age that fosters trust, knowledge and individual choice for all. And there are a lot more details about how tech companies, including AI companies, should integrate safety and privacy in their products. Advertisers should be more aware of human rights considerations, and there's much more. And we have a link to that document in the show notes. So, Benno, let me start with you. What were your main takeaways from that launch, this document on principles for information integrity?
I do think that the SG said it himself. It's not new, right? Misinformation was always there. It might be as old as information itself. Yeah. It's just like we are in a new era. We are in an era where we have to tackle it in the context of the internet. And that means obviously go to the big platforms that hold the power, that hold the algorithms, and make very sure that they don't give center stage to factual wrong messages. It has to be a balancing act as well. Don't support them, don't incentivize bad behavior. But also, on the other hand, it could backfire if you suppress these messages altogether, because people might get suspicious. Why is something hidden from me? So I think it's a balancing act. Don't support, don't suppress. This is what I would see in it.
It's very tough, isn't it, to get that balance right? I mean, you're European. It seems to me the work in Europe, around the European Union, has been quite advanced on this, really trying to come up with some decent guidelines. Perhaps the European Union is more advanced than other parts of the world. And it's interesting that now we're talking about this at a global level, the UN trying to do its bit to bring all the parties together. What I've noticed over the last few months or so, the last couple of years even, is the real change in how this whole issue is being taken a lot more seriously. And in terms of the impact of misinformation, Jérôme, I mean, you cover this a lot on your page, the UN News page in French, particularly about the very dangerous impact of misinformation on UN peacekeeping missions.
Yeah, this is something that the SG mentioned it in his report and his press conference, how harmful misinformation and disinformation is for UN peacekeeping missions. And I remember, having an interview with the head of MONUSCO, the UN mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Bintou Keita, and this interview, I did it in October, and she in this interview, she really said how harmful fake news are for peacekeepers, and especially they realized how harmful it was when in 2022, I think, there was a very deadly incident where peacekeepers and soldiers of Congolese armed forces died. And it was related to an incident because of disinformation, fake news. And since then, the MONUSCO increased its efforts to fight disinformation and misinformation. And she told me in this interview that they organize workshops with young people to help them figure out how to see where true information is and not spread disinformation and hate speech. And also they do interviews with people who are beneficiaries of UN action, UN mission. And it's really to promote positive discourse, about what the UN does, because when you have too many information, fake information about the UN mission in the country, it has an harmful impact.
It can really tarnish, as you say, what the UN does, and leads directly to harm and even to death in some examples. A subject we'll be coming back to many times on this show, I think, over the next few months. But let's get back to the main theme of today's show. That's the World Drug Report. This is one of the big studies put out every year by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. That's the UNODC. But first, here's our resident explainer, Pauline Batista, to lay out what exactly the UN Office on Drugs and Crime actually is and why we have one.
Hi, I'm Pauline Batista, and this is the UN Explained. What is the UN doing about drug abuse and crime? Have you ever wondered? Well, the UN has an agency dedicated to fighting drug abuse and crime, and it's called the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC for short. The UNODC works to educate people all over the world about the dangers of drug abuse and to improve international action against illicit drug production, trafficking, and drug-related crime. The UNODC also works to improve crime prevention and to assist with criminal justice reform in order to support the rule of law. Oh my gosh, wasn't that a lot? Anyhow, if you'd like to keep learning, you can go to news.un.org and search UNODC. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you, Pauline. The 2024 World Drug Report came out on June 26th with a warning that the number of users is going up alongside a rise in trafficking. And the legalization of cannabis in several US states, including New York State, where we are now, Canada, Uruguay, it was welcomed by many people, but it's also been accompanied by a rise in health issues, including attempted suicides. Ahead of the release of the report, I spoke to Angela Mee, the head of social affairs at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. I started by asking her about the impacts of cannabis legalization.
So the report looks at the different impact that we see where cannabis has been legalized. So in some part of the United States, in Canada, in Uruguay, and also in some other parts like Thailand. The data remains very, there remains a lot of gaps in terms of data and to understand. And it is important always to remember that the impact is very context specific. So what is happening now in the United States may be very different on what will happen if, the cannabis is legalized somewhere else. But what we see in the United States and Canada is particularly that legalization has increased the harmful use of cannabis. So not much in terms of the number of people or the percentage of people that use the drugs in general, as we call annual prevalence, but we have more people that use it more frequently. And also, particularly in the United States and Canada, with the way how cannabis has been legalized, the market is open to commercial interest that have brought also a lot of very potent substances. So the report looks at the impact of legalization in the jurisdiction where this happened, particularly in the United States and Canada, Uruguay, but cannabis has been also legalized in different forms also in some other countries outside the Americas. But where really we have most of the data is only basically from the United States and Canada, and even from the United States for certain states. So what is clear in the North America is that the cannabis legalization has brought more harmful use of a substance. So there has been some increase on the percentage of young people and of adult population using drugs, but this is not very significant, and actually is an increase that was happening even before the cannabis was legalized.
And so you're taking that you are really seeing a causal link there. You're linking the legalization.
Yes, more hospitalization, and also some studies now are emerging showing also more mental health issues relating to attempted suicide or psychosis, this kind of mental health implications.
And so you're taking that you are really seeing a causal link there. You're linking the legalization, the prevalence to these health impacts.
From a research perspective, there's never a definitive correlation or causation that you can derive from the data. And probably the real, if you want, scientific impact, we will understand only in the long term. But what seems to emerge is that the cannabis legalization accelerated some of the trends that were there before on the use of cannabis in North America.
And there's also been pushback. You mentioned Oregon, British Columbia as two examples. Do we know why that pushback took place?
Well, the public statements that have been done in the context, as you said, of Oregon and British Columbia is basically seen as the change in the policy that applied, for example, in Oregon was not the legalization of drugs, but it was more the decriminalization. So instead of arresting people who use drugs, bring them having a system that they go to treatment, or that they just pay an administrative fine. And what has happened in Oregon is that there has not been, if you want, clear in a very short time since the new policy came, a real change. And so the overdose deaths continue to increase, but even if they continue to increase all around Oregon, in all the United States. But so in a way, it's probably a response to the frustration of not seeing the quick wins that everybody was expected. There are different reasons, and the Oregon is an example where it's important to understand how drug policies impact is really very context specific. And because basically the new so-called progressive Oregon policy a few years back was not very different from policies that are very current in Europe, for example, and in Europe you don't have the level of overdoses or the level of also of use in public spaces, etc., that you've seen in Oregon. So it's always hard to draw conclusion and firm conclusion from very specific context where certain things may work or may not work.
And another controlled substance, cocaine, has seen a big rise. Also, synthetic drugs such as meth. What reasons does the report pull out for this rise?
Well, there are kind of different reasons for cocaine and for methamphetamine. I mean, on cocaine, what we have seen is that the market has suddenly changed, let's see, about 10 years ago. Some of the dynamics of the cocaine market changed both the supply and the demand. So it started particularly with the change in the criminal landscape in Europe. And so if before there was almost the monopoly of the Italian groups. This monopoly was kind of broken by new groups entering the market, particularly from the Balkan area. And these groups have started to reach directly and gain the trust that the Italians had with the Mexicans, with the Colombians for the cocaine. And then they started to compete more. And so with more competition, the price went down, and that started to trigger more availability in Europe, and so little by little in Europe the demand started to increase. On the side of the supply, there has been the peace process with the FARC, and that the peace process has changed also from that side the way how groups operated, and then a lot more groups enter into the Colombian market, also foreign groups, and there has been a trend toward industrialization of the production of cocaine. And so we saw that even from the same land, traffickers been able to exploit more and to produce more cocaine. So these dynamics reinforce each other. And so with more demand calling in Europe and then more supply coming, and then that's now where we are in this kind of vicious cycle where there is more supply calling from giving more demand and demand calling from more supply.
That was Angela Mee, one of the authors of the World Drug Report, and she also had some fascinating things to say about the UN's stance on recreational drugs and the human rights aspect of drug-related law enforcement. And the full interview's on UN Web TV. You can also find it on the UN YouTube channel. Well, Jérôme, Benno, each week I do try to find out some interesting fact on this show about the various commemorations. You've missed Year of the Camelids. That was lots of fun. There was a camel quiz. I'm sorry you weren't able to take part. Yoga Day, also lots of fun. Yoshita, your UN correspondent colleague, brought out her yoga mat for us. But for this week, I decided to go with the Day of the Seafarer, marked on the 25th of June. And I'm sure you've both been on some bad sea journeys in the past with high storms, feeling unwell. Jérôme, you were telling me earlier that you had to be held by a seafarer as you had to, shall we say, evacuate certain things inside you because you were so unwell. You've had a childhood trauma incident. I don't want you to get PTSD, but if you're happy to share it on the show, it could be very therapeutic.
It's a very short story, actually, because I was 6 years old. I can barely remember anything. I just know it was really rough, and I know still the name of the ship. It was the Caledonian McBrain.
Right. I hope it hasn't made you anti-Scottish as a result of that instance. Well, I wanted to hear directly from a seafarer. I mean, seafarers are incredibly important for the economy. They face great hardships, months away from home, piracy, as well as these weather conditions. So I got in touch with the International Maritime Organisation. That's a UN agency based in London. And they put me in touch with a 23-year-old Australian deck officer, Caitlin Garrett. Turns out she's also a huge TikTok star, and she shared this message.
Hi guys, my name is Caitlin Garrett, but some of you may know me as the Aussie Seafarer. I'm currently in Singapore doing my DP short course. When I'm in Australia, I sail as a deck officer on ro-ro vessels. We carry anything from cars to trailers to livestock and dangerous goods. On the Day of the Seafarer, I want to bring you my safety tips for sea. I think the most crucial tip for having a smooth operation is wearing the correct PPE at all times. But the safety tip that is closest to my heart is keeping the crew close. They are your second family. So on this day, I want to wish every seafarer worldwide a happy International Seafarer Day. This is our day. Keep safe, keep strong, and keep sailing.
And happy International Seafarer Day from us as well. And if you want to add to Caitlin's literally millions of TikTok fans, search for the Aussie Shefarer. See what she did there? She, that's Shefarer, the Aussie Shefarer. And that's a pun, by the way, in case you hadn't figured it out. So very entertaining TikTok star, Caitlin Garrett. Well, that's it for today. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Benno. Thank you, Jerome.
Thanks, Connor.
Great to have you here. Hope you'll be back again. And you can, as ever, go to the show notes for all the useful information. Put in some links to some of the UN stories on the World Drug Report, as well as the full interview with Angela Mee from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and the report itself, which has a lot more to say about the drug situation in different parts of the world. And you can also find the links to the UN Global Principles for Information Integrity and, of course, the International Maritime Organization. Your feedback is important to us. Please send your comments, thoughts and suggestions to unweekly@un.org. Don't forget, you can listen to UN Weekly on all good podcast platforms and watch us on the UN YouTube channel. Studio production was by the UN TV team. The editor was Andrea Ocampo. The executive producer was Mita Hasali. UN Weekly is a UN News production.